Okay, so I'm gonna start by explaining what happens when Saturn goes into the second house. So, the second house is a house that's originally ruled by Venus in Taurus. It represents the throat. It represents the family that we came from. It represents possessions, things that we sort of identify ourselves with, and it represents our wealth, how we feel about money, how we might handle money, how we might make money. Saturn is one of the two planets that can signify our relationship with our dad. Saturn and Sun can represent both of that, or a father-like figure in our life. Saturn represents karma and debt, and a whole bunch of other negative, stereotypical things. Saturn is, it likes to put order and structure to whatever house and sign that it goes into. When Saturn goes into the second house, an individual here can be very stingy, orderly, and uptight with how they handle and manage their finances. Some people might think or believe that Saturn might block or hold and put a delay on their finances and wealth, but I necessarily don't believe that. I believe it's more so a mindset and how we feel. These people could have a lot of money or a good amount of money, but they'll always just feel still maybe money is a burden, or just feel as though that it's still never enough, or they just gotta be real careful. There was just never enough wealth, so they'll just always be stingy. These are the people who will just always be like, "Oh, I'm broke," but it's a 50% chance that they're not broke. They're just being uptight and stingy with their money, and they got money in their savings account. And the other half is more so like they really are broke and they just super uptight now. So one thing you just see is that there'll just be an emphasis on how they handle their wealth. But since Saturn likes routine, orderly things, and Saturn represents older, elderly people, these people could just tend to be either stingy or wise and careful and manage how they handle their wealth. Another thing you can see here with Saturn is that these people can potentially have a slow way of speaking, a slow speech, because the second house represents our speech, the way that we speak, the way that we talk. So Saturn, is a slow moving planet, and as I keep repeating, so these people can have a slow way of speaking. Some older elderly people, 60 or 70 and above, they speak slowly. So these people can speak slowly, and these people can be slow and careful when they speak. They might not want to mess up and say something and embarrass themselves. Almost similar to Saturn in the third house, but we'll get to that when I get to that. But these people, they can be careful, and they just be careful of the speech and words that come out their mouth. They don't want to mess up when they talk and speak. These people can potentially have a speech impediment. Some people with Saturn in the second house potentially, because Saturn is a malefic planet. A malefic planet is like a planet that has like negative characteristics and traits to it. So some Saturn in the second house people, they might have like some speech impediment or whatnot. Also, potentially, on an extra note, since the second house is the opposite of the eighth house, these people might potentially, they might live a long time. They might live longer than most people. Why? Because the eighth house was the opposite of the second, represents death. And stereotypically, or at least in a textbook manner, it is stated that, Saturn and the eighth house people, they either just live a long life possibly, or they just don't really want to die. I mean, none of us wants to die, but that's just something I figure I throw out there. And you're probably saying, why am I associating this with the second house? Well, on some extra bonus stuff, because I basically just wrapped up Saturn in the second house, I'm just giving you extra information now. As we know, Venus rules the second house in the seventh house. To be honest, the second and the seventh house are bigger significators of death versus the eighth house. Why? Because one of the translations in, titles of the second house is known as like the gates of Hades, the gates of the underworld. Because from like a clock standpoint or like time of day, it is nighttime in the second house. The second house, is probably like maybe 5 a.m. in the morning. It's early morning, but it's still nighttime. The sun is still down. The ascendant, the first house, the sun is up. But in the second house, it's nighttime, and it's known as the gates of Hades because it's the beginning of darkness. And it rules the seventh house because the seventh house is known as the descendant. which is a house that Venus rules. It's the opposite of the first house. The first house, the sun is rising. The seventh house, the sun is setting. So Venus is associated with two houses where it's nighttime, where it's the beginning of darkness and the end of darkness. And in Vedic Hindu sidereal astrology, Venus is known as the king of the Asuras. The Asuras are known as demons and whatnot. So it has this natural affinity and association with the underworld. The second house and the seventh house has this natural affinity with the underworld. And like I said, Saturn delays things and stretches things out. So these people can potentially experience just a delay in death, or maybe a delay in maybe either financial ups and downs, or just delays in maybe accidents in events that could be near fatal or whatnot. And that's what I have to say about what happens when Saturn goes into the second house in your birth chart.